This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On April the 30th, we hosted our annual Defense and Security Studies Conference on Threats to Global Security under Trump 2.0, featuring expert speakers on Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and managing Canada-US relations in the second Trump era. For reasons of security, our speaker on Iran was not recorded for this series.
Our next speaker this morning is Dr. Charles Burton, who is a senior fellow at Synopsis, a think tank based in Prague and focused on Chinese affairs. He also spent many years as an associate professor at Brock University. Charles Burton served as a counselor at the Canadian Embassy to China from 1991 to 1993, and again from 1998 to 2000. He also has worked at the Communications Security Establishment of DND. Dr. Burton earned his doctorate at the U of T after attending Cambridge University in Oriental Studies and Fudan University at Shanghai in the history of ancient Chinese thought. We have often seen Dr. Burton in the media offering his incisive comments on Chinese and North Korean affairs, and of course on Chinese-Canadian relations. And we at the RCMI are delighted to have the opportunity to hear him now in person. Dr. Burton.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you, Dan, for all the arrangements and your kind accommodation of me here at the MLI. I think it's that one, right? Excellent. I have a script. Well, I think that, we can see from some of the introductions that the U.S. is evidently abandoning its post-World War II role as the leading force, upholding transnational organizations designed to assure global peace and prosperity and justice. So, as we face the situation now, the fate of the NATO, WTO, and indeed the UN are all very much in question. Trump's aggressive abandonment of America's longtime alliances and his unpredictable and erratic approach to international relations is making it very challenging for Canada to feel confident that any future treaty relationships with the United States can be relied upon. Moreover, America is transforming from protector to predator of Canada and the world. The Trump administration leverages access to the U.S. market to gain compliance on U.S. geostrategic agendas. And these, as Marcus points out, include Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, China, Taiwan, and even Greenland. And, we have been active in defending the rules-based order since the end of the Second World War. But what European or Indo-Pacific country will defend Canada if Trump decides to take steps towards his 51st state agenda for this country? After all, his tariffs are justified by his assertion that the U.S. has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by parasitical allies that it has been foolishly subsidizing in past U.S. administrations, and the U.S. has peremptorily canceled all of its foreign aid funding. But this kind of assertion on the part of Trump compares unfavorably to Chinese propaganda assurances that China's international relations are based on win-win cooperation, or to Chinese propaganda that Beijing actually cares about the well-being of people in nations outside China. Currently, I think Mr. Xi is very pleased with what's going on in global politics because it fulfills China's overall strategic plan for global domination. In 2012, the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, declared his Chinese dream for China. It's a foreign policy vision toward, as he puts it, realizing the great renewal of the Chinese nation, which is the greatest dream for the Chinese nation in modern history. According to this scheme, by 2050, China would achieve full hegemony over the world order through a framework of international relations that Mr. Xi dubs the community of the common destiny for mankind. So you see here his clenched grin in meeting an important figure in the US's international initiatives, because he has a Marxist dialectical approach that sees the old world order, once assertively led by the United States, as collapsing in fulfillment of China's ambitions to become the dominant power on the planet. So this community of the common destiny was articulated by Mr. Xi in 2017 in one of his 3.5-hour long reports to the 19th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, and it came at the 173-minute mark. So I was following along, and then at 173 minutes, I thought to myself, what the hell is this? Basically, he puts it under the rubric of adhering to the path of peaceful development and constructing a community of common destiny for mankind. And this doctrine is based on his presumption that the US is rapidly losing its power and charismatic prestige as a leader and shaper of global affairs, and of China regaining what Mr. Xi regards as its rightful and traditional civilizational role as the central focus for world politics and economics, as part of and parcel of the dynamic of the rise and fall of great empires from ancient to modern times. And China's mega ambitious Belt and Road global infrastructure program has all of its international pipelines, shipping routes, railways, and highways, ultimately leading to Beijing as the center of global trade and investment. Essentially, what we're looking at here is an ideology based on these 3 points. First of all, that China's civilization is ancient and great. Secondly, that China was weakened and is victimized by amoral Western forces since China's defeat in the Opium Wars in 1842. They like Russia, Chinese leaders spends a lot of time thinking about events that happened very long ago in history that he regards as central to contemporary affairs. And finally, that China will rise again and set things to rights. Former two-time Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, in his new book on Xi Jinping, How Xi's Marxist Nationalism is Shaping China and the World, notes that, and I quote, Xi makes the remarkably Sinocentric claim, without apology to his country's ancient neighbors, that China represents the Earth's only great and uninterrupted civilization that continues to this day in a state form. China is confident that the millennia of Chinese teachings on the natural state of the Sinocentric international order is something that enlightened foreigners of all hues will eventually comply with if they truly understand what is good for them. This is not a completely unconventional Marxist idea. You can see here C.H. Carr in 1939 talks about theories of international morality, product of the dominant group which identifies itself with the community of the whole. And for the past 100 years, and 100 years before 1939, the English-speaking peoples have formed the dominant group in the world, and current theories of international morality have been designed to perpetuate their supremacy. So China sees its own dialectical Marxist-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought doctrine as the moral equivalent of liberal democratic norms. And China is confident that the east wind will prevail over the west wind. As Xi Jinping told Vladimir Putin at their meeting in Moscow in 2023, he said that we are now living in a period of great historical change, the likes of which we have not seen in 100 years. And Mr. Putin immediately responded, "I agree." Perhaps Mr. Putin spoke too soon, because it's clear that to Xi Jinping, the folly of MAGA enabling a dramatic disintegration of America's global superpower status is fast-tracking a transformation that would be characterized even by Mandarin replacing English as the lingua franca of future global affairs. So I guess my study of Oriental studies at Cambridge was a far-reaching view. This scenario feeds into Xi Jinping's Chinese dream to rule the earth from Beijing, fulfilling its historic ambition to restore China to imperial domination of all under heaven as the Chinese emperors of ancient times. And, this is an idea which has been gaining currency. It's not just about Mr. Trump. You can see here that Mr. Biden also saw that China is the only country with the intent to reshape the international order and the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it. So, he is concerned about the decline in the universal values of citizenship and justice that have sustained so much of the world's progress over the past 75 years. Mr. Xi, on the other hand, wants to depict China as this civilized country featuring rich history, ethnic unity, and cultural diversity, an Oriental power with good government, developed economy, cultural prosperity, national unity, and beautiful mountains and rivers. I agree with the mountains and rivers observation of the chairman, but the rest of it is nonsense. But he wants China to be seen as a responsible country that advocates peaceful and common development, safeguards international justice, makes contributions to humanity, and is open, amicable, promising, and vibrant. So he made the speech in 2013, but it's as if he's anticipating Donald Trump in so much of these earlier statements and plans, and Mr. Trump's arrival really fulfills the plan as he sees it. So how is China seeing this playing out? And one can see here in the South China Morning Post, which was a pillar of British colonialism in Hong Kong, now owned by Jack Ma, and one would say something like Chinese Communist Party adjacent, that they are expecting that European Union leaders are planning to travel to Beijing for a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping in late July. The plan suggests a second successive EU-China summit would be held in the Chinese capital, despite the fact that the location is supposed to rotate. However, Xi is reluctant to make the trip to Brussels. It's understood that European Council President and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have accepted that they must travel to Beijing if they want FaceTime with the Chinese leader. It does suggest, according to the South China Morning Post, EU's leaders' willingness to make the trip as a serious effort to re-engage with Beijing at a time when the bloc's relationship with the United States has effectively collapsed. And then it notes that US President Donald Trump's return to the White House has seen him impose tariffs on EU goods while he was performing a dramatic geopolitical volte-face on Ukraine, leaving Europeans to consider him on the side of the invading Russia in the 3-year war. So for the Chinese communists, the perceived symbolism of European leaders coming to the Great Hall of the People to kowtow before Xi Jinping, China's new emperor in all but name, is meaningfully gratifying in terms of their, I guess, deep structure of their political thought. The Chinese perspective on Canada is that Canada has been weakened by decades of complacent dependency on the US for defense, that we thought we were thrifty in stiffing on military spending promises, knowing Washington would pick up the slack. Protections like the WTO or legally binding treaties are worthless. There will be no David and Goliath outcome, no principles of reciprocal fairness, and no goodwill in Canada's engagement by the Trump regime. So the question is whether we'll see a similar visit by Mr. Carney to Beijing for a similar sort of purpose as the South China Post is implying. But China will come in dangling its version of a lifeline. Let's hit the reset button, put aside our past differences, and generate economic benefits for all. Beijing is confident that Canada will be desperate for enhanced access to China's vast market. China, as is their promise, that we will get increased market share in exchange for compliance with Chinese conditions. Like, China never does anything for free. I think the key to understanding what's going on here is to see that the Beijing regime is an integrated regime of party, state, military, security, and industry, in which party, government, military, civilian, and academic, east, west, south, and north, center, the party leads everything. And Xi Jinping has been quoting Chairman Mao on this extensively, and even had it codified in the constitution of the Chinese Communist Party. So, including here in Canada, as we know more and more from leaked intelligence assessments, the CCP, I guess really like my God, is omnipresent, albeit hidden and unseen by outsiders. What they will suggest is that we seek common ground while reserving differences. This has been Chinese propaganda since the 1955 Bandung Conference. And so we have, on the one hand, Canada estranged from our erstwhile US partner, who threatens more tariffs if we can't accede to Trump's deal art on terms that heavily favor the US. And on the other hand, Beijing will use similar threats of economic retaliation if Canada moves to counter Chinese espionage, influence, interference, bribery, and intimidation operations in our country. So, we're really looking at Chinese influence across many domains: academia, domestic politics, economy, foreign policy, law enforcement, media, military, society, and technology. They're everywhere in this kind of omnipresent but hidden way. For example, China might expect Canada to formally terminate its principled position against Beijing's policies of genocide against the Uyghurs and other minorities, or its betrayal of Hong Kong, including the bounties on pro-democracy advocates in exile here in Canada, and in the larger frame, China's gross violations of international law, China's autocratic hostility towards democracy, and China's enabling of sympathetic strongman dictatorships throughout the world. It's possible that in the era of American betrayal, the smiling face of Chinese communist blandishments could tip the global geostrategic balance in fulfillment of Xi Jinping's strongly stated ambition that China should become the next global hegemon. The bottom line here is that whatever happens between the US and China in months ahead, the rapidly transforming global dynamic engendered by a Donald Trump presidency poses a severe challenge to Canada and our like-minded allies in sustaining liberal democratic principles of domestic governance and foreign relations in the years ahead. So on that point, I welcome your questions and requests for further clarification.
Question. So Trump has shut down Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe. Can China believe its luck or its eyes in the face of that?
Well, yeah, I think that, Radio Free Asia has performed a useful function in providing information that counters Chinese official narratives, and some of it gets to China. We used to have more listeners to the Radio Canada International Service, which was broadcast from a tower in Xi'an in Western China, where the reception for the French radio and the American radio was not so good. There were more listeners in China to Radio Canada International than to the entire domestic CBC. So, it is potentially a powerful tool, but this eliminating defense of the rules-based international order through America's withdrawal from the information space does just leave China with its alternative interpretations of what's going on in the world that encourages nations around the world to abandon their alliances with the West and go whole hog with China.
How does China view Russia in the long term, like as a pawn, as an ally, a useful ally for the short term? Do they respect their goals, etc.?
Marcus can talk about this too. I was at a conference on Russia-China recently, and Russia has similar concerns about things like Confucius Institutes and Chinese interference in the information space. China and Russia, don't share trust. Who could be trustful? But China is very distrustful of Russia because of the history of Stalin's relationship with the Chinese Communist Party and the betrayal, what they regard as a betrayal of Marxist-Leninism by Khrushchev's revisionism. And I think that they see Russia as a potential subsidiary power, and Russia certainly does not want to be put in any position where they're seen as the number two in the remaking of the global order. But ultimately, China just has much more resources and power than Russia, and I think ultimately they, just like they want to dominate everywhere on the planet, Asia, Africa, and eventually, and of course East Asia, Taiwan. After they take Taiwan, they'll probably move on to unification of Korea under a China-friendly regime and so on. That Russia is also there, and the Russians know it. So, all of these statements of prolonged friendship, I think, are being spoken through clenched teeth. I don't think that Putin and Xi see themselves as allies. They see themselves as instrumental, working together. But ultimately, China wants it to be all about China and for the whole planet. And maybe Russia's ambitions are simply only the restoration of the Russian Empire. So there's a conflict there.
I have heard on the news that China is going to make visits to various countries to try and establish a trade network of their own in the absence of perhaps having the tariffs too high in America. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's all part of the general plan. Xi has already been to Southeast Asia, and I dare say he plans to go to all the countries where there is a balance between they're not sure if they should be with the Americans or with the Chinese. And so I think we can expect him to be making a tour where he will offer benefits to countries and assurances that they're better off allying with China than an erratic and unpredictable Donald Trump. So this time is just gravy for him. The idea that Mr. Xi is going to call up Mr. Trump in the White House, this is not happening. Similar to what Marcus was saying about Russia, the economic consequences for China may be desperate. There may even be loss of life in a kinetic conflict. But Mr. Xi is firm in his conviction that he can realize this plan to remake the world order under Chinese domination.
With reference to the Chinese present focus on Taiwan, do you think that the Chinese administration actually feels that taking over Taiwan is essential to their worldview?
Yes. I mean, it's returning Taiwan to the embrace of the motherland has been, a big thing for a long time. When I was a student in China, we used to sing songs about liberating Taiwan. I don't think they're so interested in liberating, but they certainly see that Taiwan should be ruled from Beijing. And there's a belief, there's a propaganda belief in China that the people of Taiwan are yearning for the People's Liberation Army to come in there and allow Taiwan to be part of the great rise of China. So it's a priority. And in general, based on my survey of Beijing taxi drivers, Chinese people really feel that the Chinese government is being too weak on Taiwan and that they should have gone in there and resolved this issue early on. So, it's very much deeply part of Chinese Communist Party doctrine. And how much, when Xi will do it, and whether he'll take advantage of the instability engendered by Donald Trump to do it sooner, even by 2027, remains to be seen. But we don't have any evidence of an imminent military action against Taiwan. And then there's always a possibility that part of the deal, Trump will decide that Taiwan, being only 1/60th the population of the mainland, could be sacrificed for some other promises with Mr. Xi. Introduction.
Well, thank you, Dr. Burton, for warning us, among other things, again, that the Chinese Communist Party knows what's best for us. Although we might note that they're in broad company in constructing an imaginary national history. It's one of the reasons that we offer gifts to speakers with messages like yours.
It's not coal, then. It's not a...
No, which you must know is a large beer mug.
Thank you very much.
There you are.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.